Imagine living in a world where justice seems unattainable, where the guilty walk free and the victims are forgotten. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? But what if I told you that despite all the pain and despair, there is a way to change this reality? No, this is not just another story of unsolved crimes. It's the shocking truth about how a simple mistake can turn the tide. Get ready to uncover the controversy most prefer to ignore, the strong belief that can change everything, and the counterintuitive solution that offers an immediate reward, the hope that justice will finally be served. The university town of Moscow, Idaho, was shrouded in a blanket of silence on that cold November night. The deserted streets, lit only by the faint glow of streetlights, offered no clue to the terror about to unfold. In the house at 1122 King Road, young students slept, unaware of the nightmare approaching. The clock on the living room wall read 3:47 a.m., and the distant sound of the wind was the only thing disturbing the absolute stillness. Kaylee and Maddie, best friends since childhood, slept in the third-floor bedroom, sharing the bed as they always had. Kaylee was always the more protective of the two, with a strong and determined personality, while Maddie had a sweeter, more dreamy nature. That night, they had returned from a night out with friends, the exhaustion weighing heavily upon them like a stone. The laughter and conversations about the future had given way to the deep silence of sleep, but something sinister was already lurking outside the house. On the second floor, Xana and Ethan, a loving couple, were nestled in Xana's bedroom. Ethan, with his easygoing demeanor and infectious smile, had won Xana over on their first date. They were an enviable couple, always ready to support each other in any situation. But that night, their lives were about to change forever. A shadow moved stealthily outside, its steps carefully calculated to avoid any noise that might alert them. The back door, somewhat old and neglected, gave way easily to the intruder's skilled touch. He had studied every detail of that house, every movement of its occupants. He knew the best time to strike was when everyone was vulnerable, plunged into the deep sleep that precedes dawn. Dressed in black, the intruder slid through the kitchen like a ghost, his face covered by a mask that hid any trace of humanity. The first sound was almost inaudible, a faint rustling as the intruder ascended the stairs. On the second floor, Xana stirred in her sleep, uneasy, as if sensing something terrible. But the darkness of the night muffled any perception, any sign of the imminent danger. Ethan slept beside her, completely unaware of what was about to happen. The intruder paused for a moment in the hallway, listening to the oppressive silence filling the house. There was no turning back now. He knew this would be the night when everything changed. The knife he held, cold and sharp, reflected the little light that penetrated through the windows, a symbol of imminent destruction. The intruder continued up the stairs, his steps soft, as if the house were an extension of himself. On the second floor, he stopped in front of Xana's bedroom door. The soft sound of the couple's breathing was barely audible, but he knew they were there. The hand holding the knife trembled slightly, not from nervousness but from anticipation. He was in control, every movement planned with surgical precision. Inside the bedroom, Xana had a brief flash of consciousness. Her eyes opened for a moment, but the darkness was impenetrable. The room was shrouded in shadows, the familiar contours now distorted by the night. She felt a presence, a weight in the air, but she was trapped between sleep and wakefulness, unable to react. Ethan, beside her, slept deeply, unaware of the danger approaching. Xana tried to move, but her body felt heavy, as if something were holding her down. Then, the almost imperceptible sound of a door opening. The intruder entered the room, moving with the precision of a predator. He knew exactly where they were, every detail etched in his mind. The knife in his hand gleamed with a ghostly glow as he approached the bed. Xana finally stirred, an instinctive reflex of survival, but it was too late. The first strike was quick, almost silent, a precise stab that took the air from Xana's lungs before she could scream. Her eyes widened in a mix of surprise and pain, and darkness quickly enveloped her. Ethan woke with a start, the scream caught in his throat. He felt something warm and wet running down his body, but the shock prevented him from reacting. When his eyes finally adjusted to the dim light, he saw the dark figure standing beside the bed, the knife raised for another strike. Fear paralyzed Ethan, his mind unable to process what was happening. The second blow was brutal, without hesitation, and Ethan's world unraveled in a spiral of pain and confusion. Upstairs, Kaylee woke with a disturbing feeling, as if something was wrong. She turned in bed, her eyes searching for Maddie in the dark. Maddie was beside her, sleeping deeply, but there was something in the air, something that made Kaylee's skin prickle. She sat up in bed, her senses now on high alert. The silence in the house was deafening, as if time itself had stopped. She reached out to Maddie, shaking her gently. "Maddie, did you hear that?" Her voice was a whisper, barely audible. Maddie stirred, still half asleep. "Hear what?" she replied, her voice muffled by sleep. Before Kaylee could answer, the sound of footsteps climbing the stairs reached them. Footsteps that seemed to belong to more than just a simple human being, something that brought death with it. Terror froze Kaylee's blood. She looked at Maddie, her eyes wide, and the reality of the situation began to form in her mind. The intruder was now at the top of the stairs, his eyes fixed on the partially open bedroom door. He could hear the whispers, the fear in their voices. Every passing second increased his excitement, the twisted pleasure he felt knowing they were about to experience absolute terror. He pushed the door open gently, the low creak echoing through the house, and advanced. Kaylee barely had time to Dawn began to creep through the windows of the house on King Road, casting long, sinister shadows down the hallways. The weak light of the rising sun barely penetrated the darkness that hung over the house, where the horror of the previous night remained etched in every corner. In the oppressive silence, only the ticking of the clock in the living room dared challenge the fear that had settled in that place. Dylan, one of the two surviving roommates, woke with a feeling of unease. Something was different in the air, something that made her skin prickle and her heart race. She got out of bed, still groggy from sleep, and felt a chill down her spine when she realized the house was eerily quiet. There were no sounds of laughter or conversation, nor the usual noise of the other girls getting ready for another day at university. The house was silent in a way that felt wrong, almost supernatural. Trying to shake off the growing fear, Dylan opened her bedroom door and peeked into the hallway. Everything seemed normal, but there was a sense that something dark was lurking in the shadows. She walked slowly to the kitchen, expecting to find Xana or Ethan, perhaps already awake and making breakfast. However, the kitchen was empty, dishes piled in the sink, untouched. A sense of unease took hold of her, an intuition that something terrible had happened. When Dylan returned to the hallway, her eyes caught a quick movement at the end of the stairs. A reflection, a trick of the light? She wasn't sure, but decided to investigate. Her footsteps echoed through the house as she climbed the stairs to the second floor, where Xana and Ethan slept. As she approached their bedroom door, a cold fear gripped her body. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob, feeling an invisible pressure almost preventing her from opening the door. Finally, with a deep breath, Dylan pushed the door open. What she saw inside the room made her heart stop. The scene was a living nightmare. Blood covered the walls, the floor, and Xana and Ethan's bodies were in positions that made no sense, as if they had been ripped from their lives and left there like broken dolls. The scream stuck in Dylan's throat, a muffled sound that barely escaped. She backed away, panic taking over every fiber of her being. Desperate, Dylan ran to the third floor, her mind racing and her heart pounding uncontrollably. She needed to find the other girls, needed to know that this was all a terrible mistake, a nightmare from which she could wake up. But as she neared Kaylee and Maddie's bedroom, the reality of the situation began to crystallize in her mind. Something terrible had happened in that house, something she couldn't undo. Kaylee's bedroom door was slightly ajar. Dylan pushed it open slowly, hoping to find her friend sleeping, ready to wake up and explain that everything was fine. But what she found was an even worse scenario. Kaylee and Maddie were lying together, as they always did, but their bodies were covered in wounds that testified to the violence they had suffered. The knife, the blood, the frozen looks of absolute terror. Dylan could barely breathe. Her thoughts were in turmoil, and she knew she needed to act, needed to call the police, but her legs felt like lead. All she wanted was to get out of there, to flee from that house where death had taken up residence. In a state of shock, Dylan stumbled down the stairs, finally managing to reach her phone. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the emergency number, her voice barely able to convey the horror she had found. Time seemed to drag on as she waited for the police to arrive. The house, once a place of laughter and friendship, now seemed to suffocate her with its dark presence. Every sound, every movement of the wind outside, made her heart race. Finally, the sirens broke the silence, a piercing sound that brought with it a mixture of relief and fear. The police had arrived, but nothing could undo what had already been done. As the officers entered the house, Dylan The news of the massacre at 1122 King Road spread like wildfire through the university town of Moscow. Within hours, the small, once peaceful town had become the epicenter of a nightmare no one could have imagined. The streets were flooded with reporters, TV cameras, and a wave of morbid curiosity that seemed to contradict the silent mourning that enveloped the community. The campus, once vibrant and full of life, was now gripped by a palpable sense of loss and fear. Olivia Gonzalez, Kaylee's older sister, was at home when she received the news. The phone rang, breaking the morning silence, and Olivia's world collapsed in seconds. The voice on the other end of the line was hesitant, laden with grief and disbelief. "Olivia, I'm so sorry. Kaylee is gone." The words pierced her mind like knives, their meaning taking time to sink in. Her body reacted before her mind could process it, and she fell to her knees, the phone slipping from her trembling hands. The emptiness that took hold of Olivia was overwhelming. Her younger sister, her confidant, and best friend had been taken from her in such a brutal and senseless way. She couldn't comprehend how something so horrific could have happened to someone so full of life and dreams. The image of Kaylee, always smiling and full of energy, now painfully contrasted with the grim reality imposed on her and her family. As Olivia tried to understand what had happened, the details began to emerge. The brutality of the crime, the way Kaylee and her friends had been murdered, the cruelty of the intruder who had invaded their lives and left a trail of destruction. Each new piece of information was like a blow to Olivia's heart, but she knew she had to be strong. Her family needed her, and she had to find a way to deal with the overwhelming grief that now consumed their lives. At the Gonzalez home, grief manifested in different ways. Steve, Kaylee's father, had withdrawn into deep silence, his eyes lost in some distant point, as if trying to find meaning in the senseless. Christy, the mother, couldn't stop crying, her sobs echoing through the house, a constant reminder of the void that now inhabited their hearts. Olivia felt the responsibility of caring for her parents, but the weight of her own grief was almost suffocating. Meanwhile, at Xana's house, the shock was just as intense. Jasmine, the older sister, couldn't believe that Xana had been taken from her. The two were inseparable, sharing secrets, dreams, and a connection only sisters can understand. Now, all that was left were memories, and the pain of Xana's absence was a burden Jasmine didn't know how to bear. She remembered all the times Xana had made jokes to brighten her day, how she always found the positive side of things, and now all that had been ripped away in such a brutal and unjust way. Ethan, who had brought so much joy into Xana's life, was also remembered fondly by his family and friends. The pain of losing a child was something the Chapins didn't know how to face. Stacy and Jim, Ethan's parents, wondered how they could move forward without their son's infectious smile, without his jokes and love for life. The idea that they would never again see their son grow, graduate, and live his dreams was unbearable. As the days passed, the entire town seemed shrouded in a fog of sadness. Vigils were held. People left flowers and candles in tribute to the 4 young people who had lost their lives in such a tragic way. But none of it seemed enough to fill the void left by their absence. The pain of loss was deep, a black hole that consumed any attempt at normalcy. Friends, classmates, and even strangers who had never known Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan personally felt the impact of their deaths. There was a sense of vulnerability in the community, an underlying fear that something so terrible could happen again. But above all, there was a collective grief for the loss of 4 young, promising lives, taken so cruelly and suddenly. Olivia knew nothing. Welcome to Spooky Stories. I'm Milo, your guide through the chilling and the unknown. Here, we dive into terrifying tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Join our community of thrill seekers, and let's explore the darkness together. If you're curious about how I keep my concentration, efficiency, performance, and mental health at their peak every day. I'm going to share with you 2 resources that I use daily in my video creation routine. First, breathing for sleep. This method is essential for my deep, restful nights, ensuring I wake up refreshed and ready to create high-quality content. And the best part? It's super easy to incorporate into your routine. And then there's the 7 seconds at-home ritual. This ritual is backed by 4 neuroscience studies and helps to supercharge my brain power, keeping my focus sharp throughout the entire day. Want to try these resources and feel the difference in your routine? The links are right here in the video description and pinned in the comments. Don't miss this chance to elevate your productivity and mental well-being. After the discovery of the bodies of Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan, the town of Moscow plunged into a darkness that seemed impenetrable. The investigations continued at a frantic pace, with the police working tirelessly to find the person responsible for such brutality. The families of the victims were consumed by grief, but also by the need for justice. The anguish of not knowing who had committed such a cruel and merciless act was almost unbearable. The name Bryan Kohberger began to surface as the prime suspect. A criminology student at nearby Washington State University, he seemed like an ordinary young man, dedicated to his studies and academic career. However, for the investigators, something about him didn't add up. The connection between Kohberger and the victims was not immediately clear, but physical evidence began to point in his direction. The turning point in the investigation came with the discovery of a crucial object at the crime scene: a knife sheath left next to Kaylee and Maddie's bodies. The sheath belonged to a military-style knife, a specific type used in combat operations. This sheath, initially a mystery, became the key piece investigators needed. A microscopic DNA fragment was found on it, which, when analyzed, would reveal the identity of the potential killer. Parallel to the DNA analysis, the police began investigating Bryan Kohberger's life more deeply. What they found was disturbing. Kohberger was not just a dedicated student. He also had an obsessive interest in crimes and criminology. He had posted on online forums, conducting research on the emotions and thoughts of criminals who had committed violent murders. The police began piecing together a dark puzzle. What initially seemed like a complex investigation began to unravel quickly when Kohberger's DNA was compared to that found on the knife sheath. The match was undeniable. The investigators now had what they needed to arrest him, and in December 2022, Bryan Kohberger was arrested at his home in Pennsylvania, where he had returned to spend the holidays with his family. Kohberger's arrest brought a mix of relief and fear to the victims' families. Relief because the man they believed responsible was finally in custody, but fear because the trial was still to come and justice, although closer, was not yet guaranteed. As Kohberger awaited trial, more details about his life and possible motivations began to emerge. He did not seem to have a direct personal connection with the victims, which made the case even more terrifying. The motive behind the murders remained unclear, but many believed he was driven by a sick desire to experience and understand the sensation of taking human lives, a desire fueled by his studies and macabre interests. Bryan Kohberger's trial was surrounded by expectations and tension. The victims' families attended every hearing, seeking answers and, above all, justice for their loved ones. Kohberger, who had pleaded not guilty, remained calm and almost indifferent during the proceedings, a behavior that only increased the discomfort and outrage of all involved. As the trial progressed, the evidence against Kohberger was overwhelming. The DNA, the phone records showing he had been near the victim's house several times before the crime, and the car he drove, captured on surveillance cameras in the area on the night of the murders, all pointed to his guilt. The defense tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, but the accumulation of evidence was too powerful to ignore. Finally, after weeks of intense testimony and deliberation, the verdict was reached. Bryan Kohberger was found guilty of the murders of Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. The judge did not hesitate to impose the harshest possible sentence: the death penalty. For the families, although nothing could bring their loved ones back, the sentence brought a sense of closure, an acknowledgement that the man responsible for so much suffering would be punished. The community of Moscow began to rebuild its life, but the scars left by this tragedy would never completely disappear. The house on King Road, once a place of laughter and youth, was transformed into a symbol of loss and mourning. Now that you know the dark secrets that many prefer to keep hidden, the real question is, what are you going to do with this information? Will you continue living in ignorance, or will you use this knowledge to transform your view of justice and safety? Don't be mistaken, change begins with small actions. Are you ready to face the truth? Watch the video on the screen now and dive even deeper into this mystery. What's your take on all this? Do you believe justice was truly served? Leave your comment. Share your thoughts. Your voice can make a difference. And don't forget, subscribe to the Spooky Stories channel and turn on notifications to keep exploring the unknown and learning more about the dark side of the world around us. Let's uncover these mysteries together.